Hi, in this video we're going to look at a couple of tricks you can do with reverb to get some creative, interesting results. So the first one we're going to look at here is sidechaining reverb to get syncopated rhythmic reverbs over your track. So I'll show you with and without the reverb and then we'll go through how it was done. So this is dry. And then with the reverb. So the reverb is being applied in this case to the bass and the synth stabs, which I'll show you now. So the reverb I've gone with is FabFilter Pro R, and I've got this really over the top reverb, which without the EQ and sidechaining sounds really horrible. And then I've used an EQ to clean up all the low end. The bass had some nice high frequencies that I wanted to bring out into the reverb, but I didn't want the low end, which just sounds really messy. So I've done a low cut at 440 Hz using quite a steep 30 dB per octave cut. And that sounds like this. And the next thing is the compressor. I've gone with FabFilter Pro C2. It doesn't really matter too much what you use. This is being triggered by the kick drum, the ghost snare and the snare drum. I'll just play those on their own for you. So you can see every time one of these hits, it's pulling down the compressor. So that's going to let the drum transients through. And then I've used a really slow release on here, which emphasizes this sidechaining quite a lot. So let's have a listen to that. If I use a slower release time, it's not as obvious. So if I start off with a really low release, 10 milliseconds, and then slowly bring it up, you can hear what difference it makes. So by using a slow release and slowing it down, it really emphasizes the reverb sidechaining. In the next example, we're going to look at using Convolution Reverb for snare tails. So I've got a snare drum here. Quite tight and punchy, and I've got another snare drum that's got more of a tail to it. So I want to apply that tail to this snare drum via convolution. So I've got this snare here loaded up in here, And if we mix it in, let's have a listen to how it sounds. Okay, it sounds pretty awful at the moment, but what we can do is use the volume envelope and use that to get rid of the transient on the snare that we're using. That sounds a bit better already. And then low cut out the fundamental of the second snare drum, which I'm going to go to about around 700 Hertz. And we've added some tail and ambience to our snare drum. And with convolution, the general idea is you're taking an impulse response which is captured of an environment, but you can literally use anything and just experiment and have lots of fun with it. Things like having a drone and then convoluting against a reverse cymbal. You can get some really cool SFX and really interesting sounds. And for another example to play with is making SFX. I've used a delay for this, but you can do it with a reverb. It wouldn't really make any difference. I've got this snare drum and I've run it through Replica XT with a really extreme preset. So let's have a listen to that. So it creates this massive tail to the snare drum. So I've bounced that down to audio. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse this. And I want to get rid of the actual snare that was triggering it. If we go to here, and now we've got something we could use as a riser in a track. Let's have a listen to it. So next we're going to look at reversed reverbs and processing instruments in interesting ways. So I've got a vocal and a piano part. So I'll play them dry, then I'll show you with the reverbs, and then we'll go through how we did it. So this is the vocal and piano dry.
Though times are still high, the good stays in mind, never change. No, 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 never change. You still remain, yeah, you do.
And then with the reverb effects.
Though times are still high, the good stays in mind, never change. No, 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 never change. You still remain, yeah, you do.
So let's start off with the vocal. Firstly, I've got a reverb send, and this is being sidechained by the actual vocal itself.
Though times are still high,
So what happens is when the vocalist is performing, That triggers the compressor and pulls down the level of the reverb. And then when the vocalist isn't performing, the compression releases. So the ambience gets pulled down during the performance, and then in between the gaps, the reverb opens up and fills out the space with ambience, which is a cool little trick to keep your vocalist sounding really clear, but create a big ambience of space behind it. Then the next thing I've done is a reversed reverb to go over the top of that, which sounds like this.
Though times are still high, the good stays in mind.
Which gives you this sort of really haunting, eerie suction into the vocal. So I'll show you how I did that. So I've got this vocal from above duplicated, and then I've put it through a reverb, which is 100% wet.
Though times are still high.
Then I've duplicated that. It's going through the same reverb, but I've reversed the actual vocal. So the vocal is going backwards, but the reverb is going forwards, if that makes any sense. Oh, sorry, I'll just mute this channel at the top. Which, yeah, sounds really weird. Then I've bounced that to audio with the reverb on, so now this channel here hasn't got the reverb on, it's actually printed into the audio. Then I've reversed that background. So now the vocal is going the right way, but the reverb is going the opposite direction, which sounds like this. And then with the original vocal.
Though times are still high, the good stays in my.
And you can do this same effect with pretty much any instrument and get interesting results. So that's the exact same thing I've done with the piano. So I've got the dry piano that I start off with here. Then I've duplicated that and put a reverb on it. Which again is 100% wet. Then I've reversed the audio going into the reverb. At this stage I've had to bounce it down from contact to do this. So it's the audio in reverse going into the reverb, 100% wet. Which sounds really weird and interesting. And then I've bounced that down again and reversed it, so this has got no reverb effect on this time. So the piano is going forwards, but the reverb is going backwards. And then layered with the original piano. And then with all these, the reverb layers combined.
Though times are still high, the good stays in mind. never change. No, 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 never change. Though times are still hard, though times are still hard, the good stays in mind, never change. No, 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 never change.
So that's just something you can play around with to make things sound a bit more interesting, and you can create some really interesting SFX sounds by using reversed reverbs.